I have found a very, very special essay written by a doctor. It was the most touching Passion of Christ I have ever read in my life, and it always stirs up tears in me because he's explaining it so well. We can read the scripture, but sometimes things pass us by that he points out so nicely for us to understand and to go through the Passion with more intensity. So I hope you enjoy this as we go through the Passion of Christ, as I'm reading the essay by Dr. Pierre Barbet. And here's the introduction to this essay. One of the most deeply rooted legends in human minds is that the hard-heartedness of surgeons. We're given to understand that enthusiasm blunts our sensitivity, and this habitual attitude, reinforced by the necessity of causing pain in order to achieve good, makes us into sincerely insensible beings. This is not the case. Even if we set ourselves firmly against emotions, which must never be shown and even within us, must never interfere with a surgical act, nevertheless, pity always remains alive in us and even becomes purer as one grows older. When for many years one has been bending over the sufferings of others, when one has even experienced them oneself, one is certainly nearer to compassion than to indifference, because one is better acquainted with pain, because one knows better what are its causes and its effects. Besides, when a surgeon has meditated on the suffering of the Passion, when he has worked out its timing and its psychological circumstances, when he has methodologically set himself to reconstruct all the stages of that martyrdom of a night and a day, he can, more than the most eloquent preacher, more than the most saintly ascetics, as it were, share in the suffering of Christ. I can assure you of a dreadful thing. I have reached a point when I no longer dare to think of them. No doubt it is cowardice, but I hold that one must either have heroic virtue or else fail to understand, that one must either be a saint or else irresponsible in order to the way of the cross I no longer can. And yet, it is about this way of the cross that I have been asked to ride, and I would not refuse to do so, for I'm sure it should do good. O bone et dulcissime Jesu, come to my aid. You who had to bear them, make me able to describe your sufferings, perhaps by forcing myself to be objective and opposing emotion with my surgical insensibility. Perhaps I shall be able to reach that goal. If I should shed tears before the end, do you, my good friend reader, do the same as me and not be ashamed. It is simply be that you have understood. Please follow me in what I say. For our guides, we have the sacred book and the Holy Shroud. And the Holy Shroud is the burial cloth in which Jesus has been wrapped after he died. And these resurrection cloths, the Shroud of Turin it's called, they have been found after his resurrection. And these Shroud of Turin have amazing miracle on them, because it is a negative photograph of Jesus onto the cloth, which is a miracle. It's not possible, made by men. It's not drawn on there. It's in the midst of the fabric, where to the point where you can see Jesus' body fully, front and back, the image. And I'm talking about this on my website, which you can get to know more about the Shroud of Turin and what I have to do with the Shroud of Turin and what I offer, please visit my website on this. The Shroud of Turin is the greatest relic that has been left with us. And I make that shroud actually available to mankind. Let's continue. The Passion really begins at the Nativity, since Jesus, in his divine omniscience, always knew, saw, and willed the suffering which were awaiting his humanity. The first blood shed for us was on the occasion of the circumcision 8 days after Christmas. One can readily imagine what it must have been for a man to be able exactly to foresee his martyrdom. The Holocaust was to begin, in fact, at Gethsemane. Jesus, having given to his own his body to eat and his blood to drink, leads them by night to that grove of olives where they were in the habit of going. He allows them to rest at the entrance, taking with him a little further his 3 intimate friends, from whom he separates himself about a stone's throw in order to prepare himself in prayer. These 3 we know were Peter, John, and Jacob. Those were his closest. Those were the ones that went to him all the way. In a lot of healing circumstances, he only took those 3 apart from the others. He took them on a mountain and showed his glory to them, revealed himself to them truly, to only those 3. He knows that his hour has come. He has himself sent on the trader of Period, Vot, Vactis, Faxitius. That which thou dost, do quickly, it says in John 13:27. And excuse my Latin, it's been long ago in school that I had Latin, so I might not read it all correctly, but I know you will have pity on me. He's eager to be finished with it, and it is his will. But as he has assumed by incarnating himself this form of a slave, which is our humanity that later rebels, and there is all the tragedy of the struggle between his will and human nature. Coebit pavere et tuidere. He began to fear and to be heavy, it says in Mark 14. And I'm always translating the Latin for you. This cup which must drink contains 2 bitternesses. First, the sins of men, which he must take on himself, on him, the just one, in order to ransom his brothers. And this was probably the worst, an ordeal that we're going to imagine, because it is the saints amongst us who feel most keenly their worthlessness and their baseness. We shall perhaps better understand his anticipation, the experience beforehand of the physical tortures which he already suffers in thought. Nevertheless, we have only experienced the retrospective shudder at those sufferings which are past. It is inexpressible. Pater si vis transfer calicium instuda mi, verum tamen non mea voluntas sed tua fundat. Father, if thou wilt, remove this chalice from me, but yet not my will, but thine be done. It says in Luke 22. It is his humanity speaking, and which submits for his divinity knows that its will from all eternity. The man is caught in a blind alley. His 3 faithful friends are asleep. Pui tristia, as St. Luke says. Poor men. The struggle is terrible, and an angel comes to strengthen him, but at the same time, so it seems, to receive his acceptance. Et factus in agonia prolixius orabat, et factus est sudor eius sicut gutoi sanguinis decurrentis in terram. And being in an agony, he prayed for the longer, and his sweat became as drops of blood trickling down upon the ground, it says in Luke 22:43 and 44. It is the sweat of blood which certain rationalists, exegetists, scenting some miracle, have treated as symbolically. It is strange to note what nonsense these modern materialistics can talk in regard to scientific matters. Let us remember that the only evangelist to record the fact was actually a physician. And our venerated colleague Luke Medicus Carissimus, which is translated the beloved physician, as he was called in the book of Colossians, does so with a precision and consciousness of a good clinic. Hematidrosa, it is a very rare phenomenon, but has been well described. It is produced, as Dr. Lee Beck has written, in very special conditions, great physical debility accompanied by violent mental disturbance, followed on profound emotion or great fear. Dread and horror are at their maximum, so it is mental disturbance. This is what St. Luke means by agonia, which in Greek signifies a combination of struggle and anxiety or fear. And his sweat became as drops of blood trickling down upon the ground. How can one explain this? There's an intense vasodilation of the subcutaneous capillaries. That means it's an extension of the capillaries underneath the skins, which burst on contact with millions of sweat glands. The blood mingles with the sweat, and it is a mixture which forms into beads and flows over the whole body in a sufficient quantity to fall onto the ground. Note that this microscopic hemorrhages is produced all over the skin, which thus already suffers a general injury and becomes sore and tender while awaiting the blows which will come. But we must move onwards. Here are Judas and the temple attendants armed with swords and staffs. They have lanterns and ropes, and in this criminal case must be judged by the procurator. They have with them a platoon of the Roman guard. The tribune of Antonia accompanies them to make sure things are orderly. It is not yet the turn of the Romans. They are behind the fanatics, aloof and contemptuous. Jesus steps forward. One word of him is enough to throw the assailants to the ground. So it says in John 18:4-11, it is described. One word of Jesus, and they all fall to the ground, his power being revealed. The last manifestation of his power, and before he abandons himself to the divine will. Honest Peter seizes the opportunity to cut off the ear of Malchus. In his last miracle, Jesus has healed it. So Peter draws out a sword and cuts off the ear of one of the soldiers, which Jesus makes him stop and immediately heals that soldier. But the yelling crowd have recovered and have bound Jesus. They led him away without courtesy, one may well imagine, and the minor actors are allowed to get away. That means the disciples. To all appearances, he has been abandoned. Jesus knows that Peter and John are following him far off in the distance. It is described in Mark 14:54. and that Mark will only escape arrest by running away naked, leaving with the guard the cloth with which had been wrapped around him. It says in Mark 14:51. They were holding him on with his clothes, and he escaped by slipping out of his clothes and running away naked. The disciples were afraid. They were scared. Actually, the only one that followed him all the way to the cross was John. Here they are before Caiaphas and Sanhedrin. It is by now the middle of the night, and it is clear that they're acting according to previous instructions. Jesus refuses to answer as for his doctrine. He has taught it publicly. Caiaphas is all at sea, furious, and one of the soldiers, expressing his vexation, gives the accused a hard blow in the face. Sic respondis pontifici? Answered thou the high priest so? It is said in John 18:22. Nothing has been achieved. They must wait for the morning till the witnesses can give evidence. Jesus is dragged from the hall into the courtyard. He sees Peter, who has denied him 3 times. With one look, he pardons him. It is described that Jesus at the Last Supper already told Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times before the cock crows. And Peter did. But Jesus understands and forgives. And with one look, he pardons him. He's dragged into some underground room, and the rabble of attendants is going to enjoy itself to the full at the expense of this false prophet, dully bound, who, a short time ago, was able to throw them to the ground by who knows what sorcery. He's beset with slaps and blows. They spit on his face, and as there will have no chance of sleep, they're going to amuse themselves a little. A cloth is tied over his head, and each one is going to have his turn. Their slaps ring out, and these brutes are heavy-handed. Prophesy, tell us, O Christ, who struck you? They're shouting. His body's already full of pain. His head is ringing like a bell. He has fits of giddiness, and he's silent. With one word, he could destroy them. Et non aspiruit ossuum. It says in Isaiah 53:7, and he opened not his mouth. This prophet Isaiah lived 600 years before Jesus was born and already prophesied this. The rebel ends by growing weary, and Jesus waits. In the early morning, the second hearing takes place, and a red string of false witnesses files past, proving nothing. He must condemn himself by affirming his divine sonship, and his base, second-rate actor Caiaphas proclaims the blasphemy by tearing his robes. Oh, you may be sure the good, careful Jews who are not given to wasting money have a slit already and lightened sewn up, which can be used many times over. So the robe is already stitched like that he can just tear it off when it is necessary to make a scene, to make the point, and it's easily sewn up again. So he's not ruining his clothes. All that remains is to obtain from Rome the death sentence, which has been reserved to herself in this protectorate country. Jesus, already worn out with fatigue and bruised all over his blows, is now to be dragged to the other end of Jerusalem, to the upper town, to the Tower of Antonia, a sort of citadel from which the majesty of Rome keeps order in the city that is always too excited for a taste. The glory of Rome is represented by a miserable official, a little Roman of the night class, a self-made man who's only too ready to hold this difficult command over a fanatical, hostile, and hypocritical people. Pilate's great care is to keep his position wedged between the imperious orders of Rome and the sly ways of the Jews, who are often very well in with the emperor. In short, he is the poor type of man. He has but one religion, if he has one at all, that of devious Caesar, the divine emperor. He's the mediocre product of barbarous civilization, of materialistic culture. One should not be too hard on him for this, for he is that which he's made of him. The life of a man has little value for him, especially if he does not happen to be a Roman citizen. He has been taught nothing about pity, and he knows but duty to maintain order. In Rome, this is considered very suitable. And these quarrelsome Jews, with their lies and their superstitions, with their taboos and their mania for washing for no reasons, their servility and their insolence, and those cowardly denunciations to the ministry of a colonial administration which is doing its best. The whole thing disgusts him. He despises them and he fears them. With Jesus is just the opposite, although in what state he does appear before him, covered with bruises and spit. Jesus impresses him, and there's something he likes about him. He will do everything he can to rescue him from the claws of the fanatics. Jesus is a Galilee. Let us pass him on to what old blackguard Herod, who's always playing at being the king, thinks he's somebody. But Jesus despises the old fox and refuses to answer him. And now he's back, accompanied by the yelling crowd and these insufferable Pharisees, forever whining on a high-pitched note and wagging their heads. They're hateful creatures. Let them remain outside, especially as they would consider themselves defiled merely through entering the Roman Praetorium. Pontius questions this poor man in whom he is interested, and Jesus does not despise him. He pities him for his invincible ignorance. He answers him gently and even tries to teach him. It is not so long that a massacre certain Galileans in the temple who were showing rather too much excitement. Yes, but these crafty Sanhedrin's men are being so insinuate that I'm no friend to Caesar, and that is no laughing matter. And then, what on earth is all this talk about the King of the Jews? The Son of God and the Messiah? Had he read the scriptures? Pilate might perhaps have been another Nicodemus, for Nicodemus is a coward, but it is cowardice which is going to break down the dikes. This is a just man, and I will have him scorched, or Roman logic, and then these brutes may have some pity on him. It says in John 19:1, and therefore Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. The soldiers of the guard take Jesus into the hall of the Praetorium, and all the men of the cohort are summoned to the scene. There are few amusements in this occupied country, and yet the Savior has often shown himself to have a special sympathy with soldiers. He admired the trust and humility of the centurion and his affectionate care for the servant whom he has healed. Later it will be the centurion of the guard on Calvary who will be the first to proclaim his divinity. The cohort seems, however, to be seized by a collective frenzy which Pilate had not foreseen. Satan is there, breathing hatred into them. But that is enough. Nothing is said. They are just blows, and let us try to follow to the end. They remove his clothes and bind him naked to a column of the hole. The arms are held up in the air, and the wrists are bound to the shaft. The scourging is done in numerous thongs, to which are fixed at some distance from the loose end 2 balls of lead are small piece of bone. Certainly the stigmata on the holy shroud, the shroud of Turin, corresponds to this type of flagrum, and I show you a flagrum. The number of strokes is limited to 39 by Hebrew law. But his executioners are legionaries, without restraint, and they will go on to the point of making him faint. There are in fact marks without number on the shroud, and they are nearly all on the back. The front of the body is against the column. They are to be seen on the back, on the shoulders, on the loins. The lashes fall on his thighs and on the calves of his legs, and it is there at the end of the thongs, beyond the balls of lead, encircle the limb and mark it with a fur right around to the other side. There are 2 executioners, one on each side of him, of unequal height. All this may be deducted from the direction of the marks that are seen in the shroud. They alternate their strokes with great zest. At first the strokes leaving long livid marks, long blue bruises underneath the skin. Remember that the skin had already been affected, that it is sore owing to the millions of little intradermic hemorrhages brought about by the sweat of blood. Further marks are made by the balls of lead. Then the skin into which the blood has crept becomes tender and breaks under the fresh blows. The blood pours out, shreds of skin become detached and hang down. The whole of the back is now no more than a red surface on which great furrows stand out like marble, and there and here, everywhere are deeper wounds caused by the balls of lead. These wounds shaped like a halter, the 2 balls and the thong between them will make their marks on the shroud. At each stroke the body gives a painful shudder, but he has not opened his mouth, and his silence redoubled the satanic rage of these executioners. It is no longer a cold-blooded judicial execution, it is the unchaining of demons. The blood flows from his shoulders down to the earth, and the large paving stones are covered with it, and it is scattered like rainy by the lifted ribs as far as the red cloak of the onlookers. But the strength of the victim soon begins to fail. Sweat breaks out on his forehead. His head whirls with giddiness and nausea. Shivers runs down the spine. His legs give way under him, and if he has not been tied up by his wrists, he would slip down into the pool of blood. They have completed the count, even though they have not counted. After all, they have not been received the order that he should die under the lash. Let him recover a bit. There will be further chances for amusement. And this great fool claims to be a king, as if he's held under the Roman eagles. And was it more to be a king of the Jews? Of all ridiculous things, he has had some trouble with his subjects. What matter? We will be his faithful supporters. Quick, a rope and a scepter. He has been put to sit at the base of the column, not a very secure place for his majesty. An old legionary cloak thrown over his naked shoulders confer on him the royal purple, a reed in his hand, and everything is complete except the crown. Now for something original. For 19 centuries he will be known by his crown, which no other crucified being has worn. In the corner there are bundles of faggots cut from those little trees which thrive on the outskirts of the city. The wood is flexible and covered with long thorns, and much longer and sharper and harder than those of the acacia. They plait with caution, something like the bottom of a basket, which they place on his head. They beat down the edges, and with a band of twisted rushes they bind it on the head from the nape of the neck to the forehead. And I will show you the picture of faggots, bundles of faggots. The thorns dig deep into the scalp and it bleeds, and we surgeons know how much a scalp can bleed. The top of the head is already flooded with blood, long streams of blood, have flown down to the forehead and under the band of rushes, have soaked into the tangled hair and into the beard. The comedy of adoration has begun. Each in turn comes forward and bows to the knees before him with a horrible grimace, followed by a great blow. "Hail, King of the Jews!" But he answers nothing. His poor face, so ravaged and pale, displays no movement. It really is not funny. In their exasperation, his faithful subjects spit in his face. "You don't know how to hold the scepter, give it there." There's a blow on the crown of the thorns, which make it sink further in, and then fresh blows. I cannot remember, did he receive it from one of the legionaries or from the gentlemen of the Sanhedrin? But I can see that the blow from the stick delivered from the side has made a horrible bruise on his face, and that his fine, well-shaped nose has been disfigured owing to the septum being broken, the nose being broken. The blood is flowing from his nostrils. Oh my God, this is enough. But now Pilate is back, rather worried about the prisoner. What have these brutes been doing to him? Well, they have dealt with him right. If the Jews are not satisfied now, he will show him to them from the balcony of the Praetorium, in his royal robes, and is quite astonished at the pity he finds himself feeling for this poor, bedraggled creature. But he has underestimated the hatred. Tolle, crucifige. Away with him, crucify him, they're screaming. It says in John 19:15. And then they put forward the argument that terrifies him. "If thou releasest this man, thou art not Caesar's friend, for whosoever makes himself a king speaketh against Caesar." The coward then surrenders completely and washes his hands. As St. Augustine would write later, however, "It is not thou, O Pilate, who didst kill him, but the Jews. With their cutting tongues, and then compared with them, thou art far more innocent." They tear the cloak from him, which has already stuck to his wounds. The blood starts to flow once more. He gives a great shudder. They replace his own clothes which become stained with the red. The cross is ready. They place it on his shoulders. But by what miracle of strength does he remain standing beneath this burden? It is not in fact the whole cross, but only the great horizontal beam, the patibulum, which he must carry as far as Golgotha, but still it weighs nearly 125 pounds, which is 50 kilograms. The vertical stake, the steepest, is already planted on Calvary. So the patibulum is this part here, the shorter one, and the steepest, this part here, is already at Calvary, so he has to carry this part. And he starts on his journey with bare feet along the rough road strewn with stones. The soldiers pull the cords which bind him anxiously to know whether he will last out till the end. 2 thieves follow him with the same equipment. The road is fortunately not very long, about 650 yards or 600 meters. And the hill of Calvary is just outside the gate of Ephraim. But the journey is a very cured one. Even inside the ramparts, Jesus painfully puts one foot before the other, and he often falls. He falls on his knees, which are soon all raw. The soldiers who form the escort lift him up and are not too brutal about it, for they feel he might easily die on the way otherwise. And all the time, there's that beam balanced on his shoulders, bruising him, and which seems to wish to force its way into his back. His shoulders are covered with raw places, which open up again and get larger and deeper with each step he takes. He is worn out. On his seamless coat, there is a large patch of blood, which gets even larger till it reaches right down his back. He falls again, and this time at full length. The beam falls off him. He will he be able to get up again? Luckily, at this moment, a man passes by on his way from the fields, one Simon of Cyrene, who is soon, along with his sons, Alexander and Rufus, going to be good Christians. The soldiers make him carry this beam, and the good fellow is willing enough. Oh, how well I would do it. There's at last only the slope of Golgotha to be climbed, and they make their painful way to the top of the hill. Jesus sinks to the ground, and the crucifixion begins. Oh, it is not very complicated. The executioners know their work. First of all, he must be stripped. The lower garments are dealt with easily enough, but the coat has firmly stuck to his wounds. That is to say, to his whole body. And the stripping is a horrible business. Have you ever removed the first dressing, which has been on a large bruised wound and has dried on it? Or have you yourself ever been through an ordeal which sometimes required a general anesthetic? If so, you know that it is how it is like. Each thread has stuck to the raw surface, and when it is removed, it tears away one of the innumerable nervous ends which have been laid bare by the wounds. These thousands of painful shocks add up and multiply, each one increasing the sensitivity and nervous system. Now, it is not just a question of local lesion, but of almost the whole surface of the body, and especially of that dreadful back. The executioners are in a hurry and set up about their work roughly. Perhaps it is better thus, but how does this sharp, dreadful pain not bring on a fainting fit? How clear it is that from beginning to the end, he, Jesus, dominates. He directs his passion. The blood streams down yet once more. Then he lay down on his back. Had they left him the narrow loincloths which the modesty of the Jews have been able to preserve for those condemned to the death? I must say I don't know. It is of little importance in any case. In his shroud he will be naked. So they don't know if the cloth of the loin will have been there, or has been even that removed when he was hanging on the cross. When he was laid down in the burial cloth later on, he was completely naked. The wounds on his back, on his thighs, and on the calves of his legs become caked with dust and with tiny pieces of gravel. He has been placed at the foot of the steepest, with his shoulders lying on the patibulum. The executioners take the measurements, the stroke with an auger to prepare the holes for the nails, and the horrible deeds begin. An assistant holds out one of the arms with the palm uppermost. The executioner takes hold of the nail, a long nail, pointed and a square, which near its large head is 1/3 of an inch thick, or 8 millimeters. He gives him a prick on the wrist, and that forward fold, which he knows by experience, one single blow with a great hammer, and the nail is already fixed in the wood, in which a few vigorous taps fix it firmly. And I show you some of those nails. Jesus has not cried out, but his face has contracted in the way terrible to see. But above all, I saw at the point moment that is numb with a violent gesture striking against the palm of his hand. His medium nerve has been torched. I realize what he had been, though. An inexpressible pain darts like lightning through his fingers, then like a trail of fire right up his shoulders and bursts into his brain. The most unbearable pain that a man can experience is that caused by wounded the great nervous centers. It is nearly always causes a fainting fit, and it is fortunate that it does. Jesus has not willed that he should lose his consciousness, though. Now it is not as if the nerve were right cut off. No, I know how it is. It is partially being destroyed. The raw place on the nervous center remains in contact with the nail. And later on, when the body sags, it will be stretched against this like a violin string against the bridge, and it will vibrate with each shaking or movement, reviving the horrible pain. This will go on for 3 hours. The other arm is pulled by the assistant. The same actions are repeated and the same pains. But this time, remember, he knows what to expect. He's now fixed on the patibulum, to which his shoulders and 2 arms are conformed exactly. He already has the form of the cross. How great he is. Now they must get him back on his feet. The executioners and his assistant take hold of the ends of the beam and then hold up the condemned man, who is first sitting, then standing, then moving him backward. They place him with his back against the stake. But this is done by constantly pulling against those 2 nailed hands, and one thinks of those median nerves and the pain. With a great effort and with arms extended, though the steepest is not very high, quickly, for it is very heavy, and with a skillful gesture they fix the patibulum on top of the steepest. On the top, with 2 nails, they fix the title in 3 languages. The title says, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. It is described in John 19:19. The body, dragging on the 2 arms which are stretched out blithely, is sagging a bit. The shoulders, wounded by the whips and by carrying the cross, have been painfully scraped against the rough wood. The nape of the neck, which has just above the patibulum, has been banged against it during the movement upward, and it is now just above the stake. The sharp points of the great cap of thorns have made even deeper wounds of the skull. His poor head is leaning forward, for the thickness of his crown prevents him leaning against the wood, and each time that he straightens, he feels the pricks. The body is meanwhile only held by the 2 nails fixed into the wrists. Once more those median nerves. He could be held fast without anything else. The body is not slipping forward, but the rule is that the feet should be fixed. There's no need of the brackets for this. They bend the knees and stretch the feet out on flat onto the wood of the steepest. Why then, since it is useless, is the carpenter given this work to do? It is certainly not in order to lessen the pain of the crucified. The left foot is flat against the cross. With one blow of the hammer, the nail is driven into the middle of it, between the 2nd and the 3rd bones. The assistant then bends the other knee, and the executioner, bringing the left foot round in front of the right, which the assistant is holding flat, pieces his foot with a 2nd blow in the same place. This is easy enough. With a few vigorous blows with a hammer, the nail is well embedded into the wood. This time, thank God, it is more ordinary pain, but the agony has scarcely begun. The whole work has not taken the 2 men much more than 2 minutes, and the wounds have not bled much. They then deal with the 2 thieves, and the 3 gibbets are arranged facing the city which kills its God. Do not let us listen to the triumphant Jews as they insult him in his pain. He has already forgiven them, for they know not what they do. Jesus has at first been in the state bordering on collapse. After so many tortures for the worn-out body, this immobility is almost a rest, coinciding as it does with the general lowering of his vitality. But he thirsts. He has not said so as yet. Before lying down on the beam, he has refused the analgesic drink of wine mingled with myrrh and gall, which is prepared by the charitable women of Jerusalem and which kind of numbs his pain. He wishes to know his suffering and its completeness. He knows that he will conquer it. He thirsts. Yes, aduhesit lingua me fausibus meis. It says in Psalm 21:16, my tongue has cleaved to my jaws. He has neither eaten nor drunk anything since the evening before, and it is now midday. His sweat in Gethsemane, all his fatigue, his loss of blood in the praetorium, and at other times, and even the small amount now flowing from his wounds, all this has taken a good part of his sum total of blood. He thirsts. His features are drawn, his pale face is streaked with blood, which is congealing everywhere. His mouth is half open and his lower lip has already begun to drop. Little saliva is flowing down to his beard, mingled with the blood from his injured nose. His throat is dry and on fire, but he can no longer swallow. He thirsts. How can one recognize the fares of the children of men in the swollen face, all bleeding and deformed? Vermis sum et non homo. I am a worm and no man, it says in Psalm 21:7. It would be horrible if one did not see shining through it the serene majesty of God who wishes to save his brothers. He thirsts, and he will soon say it so, as to fulfill the scriptures. A great simpleton of a soldier wishing to hide his compassion beneath a mocking jest soaks a sponge with his acid posca acetum, also called vinegar as the Gospels call it, and holds it up to him at the end of the reed. And it's not a torture to give somebody vinegar. It is actually helping. Will he drink only one drop of it? It is that the fact of drinking brings on a mortal fainting fit in these poor condemned creatures. How then, after the sponge had been held up to him, he was able to speak 2 or 3 more times. Now he will die at his own hour. He thirsts. And that just begun. But a moment later, a strange phenomenon occurs. The muscles of his arms stiffen of themselves in a contraction which becomes more and more accentuated. His deltoid muscles and his biceps become strained and stand out. His fingers are drawn sharply inwards. It is a cramp. You have all had some experience with this acute progressive pain in the calves of the legs, between the ribs, a little everywhere. One must immediately relax the contracted muscles by extending it. But watch. On his thighs and on his legs are monstrous rigid bulges, and his toes are bent. It is like a wounded man suffering from tetanus, a prey to those horrible spasms which once seen can never be forgotten. It is what we describe as tetanization, when the cramps become generalized, which is now happening. The stomach muscles become tightened and set on dolgens and the intercostals, then the muscles of the neck and the respiratory. His breathing is gradually becoming shorter and lighter. His sides, which have already been drawn upward by the traction of the arms, and now exaggeratedly so, the solar plexus sinks inward, and so do the hollows and the collarbone. The air enters with a whistle sound, but scarcely come out any longer. His breathing into the upper regions only. He breathes in a little, but cannot breathe out. He thirsts for air. It is like someone in the throes of an asthma attack. A flush of gradually spread over his pale face. It has turned purple and then blue. He is asphyxiating. His lungs, which are loaded with air, can no longer empty themselves. He is suffocating. His forehead is covered with sweat. His eyes are prominent and rolling. What an appalling pain must be hammering in his head. He's going to die. Well, it is best so. Has he not suffered enough? But no, his hour has not come yet. Neither thirst, nor hemorrhage, no lack of air, no pain will be able to overcome the Savior of God. And if he dies with these symptoms, he will only die in truth because he freely wills it. Habens in prostate ponere aninam suam et recipere eam. Having the power to lay down his life and to take it up again, it says in Psalm 63:3. What then is happening? Slowly, with a superhuman effort, he's using the nails through his feet as a fulcrum. That is to say, he's pressing on his wounds. The ankles and the knees stretch themselves out a bit by bit, and the body is gradually lifted, thus relieving the pressure on the arms. A pressure which was of verily nearly 240 pounds on each hand. That is about 90 kilograms. We thus see how through his own effort the phenomenon grows less and the cramps recedes and the muscles become relaxed. Anyway, those of the chest. The breathing becomes more ample and moves down to the lower level. The lungs are unloaded and the face soon resumes to its former pallor. Why is he making all this effort? It is in order to speak to us, Pater dimite illis. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. He proclaims, and it is written in Luke 23:34. Yes, may he indeed forgive us, we who are his executioners. But a moment later, his body begins to sink down once more, and the cramps will come once again. And each time that he speaks, we have anyway preserved 7 of his words. And each time that he wishes to breathe, it will be necessary for him to straighten himself to get back his breath, holding himself upright on the nails through the feet. And each movement has its echo, so to speak, in his hands, in inexpressible pains. Those median nerves, once again, remember? It is a question of periodical suffocation of the poor unfortunate who is being strangled and then allowed to come back to life, to be choked once more, several times over. He can only escape from this suffocation for a moment at a time and at the cost of terrible suffering and by an effort of the will. And this is going to last 3 hours. Oh God, my God, may you be able to die. I am there at the foot of the cross with his mother and John and the women who attended upon him. The centurion who had been standing a little apart is observing the scene with an attention that has already become respectful. Between 2 attacks of not being able to breathe, he draws himself up and speaks. Son, behold thy mother. Then he said to the disciple, behold your mother. Oh yes, dear mother, who adopted us from day one. A little later, the poor wretch of the thief manages to have the gates of paradise opened for him. But when, oh Lord, are you going to die? I know well that Easter awaits you and that your body will not decay as ours. As it is written, non dabis sanctum tuum videre corruptionem. In Psalm 15:1 it says, thou wilt not give thy Holy One to see corruption. But oh poor Jesus, forgive a surgeon for these words. All your wounds are becoming infected. This was certain to happen. I can see clearly how a light-colored, transparent lymph is oozing from them, which collects at the deepest part in a wax-like crust. On the earliest wounds, false membranes are formed, which secrete serum mixed with pus. It is also written, Putruerunt et corrupta sunt cicatrices meae. My sores are putrefied and corrupted. In Psalm 37:5. A swarm of horrible flies, of great yellow and blue flies, such as one finds in abattoirs and charnel houses, is whirling the whole time around his body. They swoop down on the different wounds in order to suck at them and then lay their eggs. They set on his face and cannot be driven away. Fortunately, the sky has during the last moments gone dark and the sun is hidden. It has suddenly become very cold, and these daughters of Beelzebub have one by one taken their departure. As it is written in Luke 23:44, now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness all over the earth until the 9th hour. It will soon be 3 o'clock at last. Jesus is holding out the entire time. Every now and then he draws himself up. All his pains, his thirst, his cramps, the suffocation and the vibration of the 2 million nerves have drawn not even one complaint from him. But while his friends are there indeed, his father, and this is the last ordeal, his father seems to have forsaken him, for he cries out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. In Matthew 27:46 it describes, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He now knows that he's going. He cries out, consummatum est. It is done. The cup is drained. The work is complete. Then drawing himself up once more, and as if to make us understand that he is dying of his own will, iterum clamans voci magna, again crying out with a loud voice. It is described in Luke 23:46 and Matthew 27:50. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. He died when he willed to do so. I wish to hear of no more psychological theories. Oh yes, Lord, you may be blessed for having truly willed to die, for there was nothing we could do. With the last sigh, your head dropped slightly towards me, with your chin above the breastbone. I can see your face straight before me, and it is now relaxed and calm, and in spite of this dreadful stigmata, it is illuminated by the gentle majesty of God, who is always present there. I have thrown myself on my knees before you, kissing your pierced feet, from which the blood is still flowing, though it is coagulating at the tips. The rigor mortis has seized you in brutal fashion, like a stag run down in the chase. Your legs are as hard as steel and burning. What unheard of temperature has given you this titanic spasms? And I want to tell you that the exact hour that he died, it is recorded, was 3 o'clock, and interestingly enough, it is a tradition in the Jewish tradition at this time that all the Passover lambs, the celebration of the Passover, the lambs are sacrificed at exactly the same time everywhere, exactly at 3 o'clock. So he willed to die exactly at that time, again showing us that he was the sacrifice for our sins. The lambs that have been sacrificed were to clear the sins, and Jesus died as the lamb at exactly the same time, 3 o'clock. Isn't that amazing? There are no coincidences. There has been an earthquake. What is that to me? And the sun has undergone an eclipse. Joseph has gone to Pilate for your body, and he will not be refused. The latter hates the Jews who have forced him to kill you. That writing above your head proclaims this answer for all to see. Jesus, King of the Jews, has been crucified like a slave. The centurion has gone to make his report, and the brave man has proclaimed you to be truly the Son of God. It is described in Luke 23:47. So when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly this was a righteous man." We are going to lower you, and it will be easy once the nail has been taken out from the feet. Joseph and Nicodemus will unfasten the beam of the steepest. John, your beloved disciple, will bear your feet. With 2 others we will support your loins, using the sheet twisted to make a rope. The shroud is ready on the stone nearby in front of the sepulchre, and there, taking their time, they will remove the nails from your hands. But who's this? Oh yes, the Jews must have asked Pilate to clear the hill of the gibbets, which offended the eye and would defile tomorrow's feasts. A brood of vipers who strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Some soldiers break the legs of the thieves, giving them great blows with an iron bar. They now hang miserably, and as they can no longer raise themselves on the ropes binding their legs, detenization and suffocation will soon have them finished. But this does not apply to you. Os non communitatis ex eo. You shall not break a bone of him. It is written in John 19:36. Can you not leave us in peace? Can you not see he is dead? No doubt, they say. But what is this idea that one of them has? With an exact and tragic gesture, he has raised the shaft of the lance. It went with one blow upwards. On the right side, he drives it in deep. But why? And immediately there came out blood and water, as it is written in John 19:34. John truly saw it, and I saw it, and we would not lie. A broad stream of dark liquid blood, which gushed out of the soldier, slowly flowed and dribbled over the chest, coagulating in successive layers. But at the same time, and especially noticeable at the edges, there are flows of clear liquid like water. Let us see the wound is below and to the outside of the nipple, the 5th space, and below from the below. It is therefore the blood from the right auricle, and water issued from the pericardium. But then, O poor Jesus, your heart was compressed by this liquid, and apart from everything else, you had the agonizing cruel pain, your heart being held as in a vice. Had we not already seen enough? Was it that we should know this, that this man performed this odd, aggressive act? The Jews might also have made out that you were not dead, but I fainted. Your resurrection needed this testimony. Thank you, soldier. Thank you, Longinus. One day you will die as a Christian martyr. The Longinus was the soldier with a spear. And I have to mention this because this is really important. You may not have understood the importance of what has happened, that blood and water, which was not water, it was serum, it was clear liquid, was flowing out of the side, is because that his heart became raptured. He died literally of a broken heart, of nothing else but a broken heart. That's why when Longinus stabbed Jesus into the side, water, the serum, came out of one side of the heart and the other side had the serum because it didn't mix anymore. The death caused was the broken heart, and it is called a myocardial infarct. That's what it is called, the medical term. And when the rapture happens, one screams in a high-pitched voice. But you see, as he was hanging there on the cross, he was not able to breathe and get the air out. So he couldn't have screamed for pain or because of anything else. But it is caused by the broken heart a high-pitched scream. He died of a broken heart. And now, reader, let us thank God who has given me the strength to write this to the end, and I have to say, for me to read it to you. Though not without tears, all these horrible pains that we have lived in him were foreseen by him all through his life. He premeditated them and willed them out of his love so that he might redeem us from our sins. Oblatus est quia ipsi voluit. In Isaiah 53:7, he was offered because it was his own will. And again, Isaiah lived 600 years before the birth of Jesus. He directed the whole of his passion without avoiding one torture, accepting the psychological consequences without being dominated by them. He died when and how and because he willed it. Jesus is in agony till the end of time. It is right, it is good to suffer with him and to thank him when he sends us pain, to associate ourselves with his. We have, as St. Paul writes, to complete what is lacking in the passion of Christ, and with Mary his mother and our mother, to accept our fellow suffering fraternally and with joy. O Jesus, you who had no pity on yourself, you who are God, have pity on me, who I am a sinner. Laus Christus. Dr. Pierre Barbet, surgeon at the Hospital St. Joseph, Paris. Thank you for going with me through the Passion of Christ. And I hope you understand more now, understand deeper, could feel deeper, and remember, Christ died by his own will to carry our sin.